Poštovani gledalci, dobrodošli u još jedno izdanje emisije Granice Istoka. Ja sam Harun Karčić. Turska vojska je nedavno pokrenula vojnu operaciju na području sjeverne Sirije s ciljem uklanjanja kurdskih marksističkih boraca koji na toj teritoriji godinama djeluju i napadaju mete unutar Turske. U dogovoru sa Washingtonom i Moskvom radi se na formiranju sigurnosne zone kakvo Ankara zagovara od 2012. godine. Međutim, iako je riječ o sigurnosnoj zoni, Ankara nije naišla na razumijevanje svojih zapadnih saveznika. Reakcije tih država, kao i njihovih medija, bile su izuzetno negativne i kritične prema Turskoj. U ovom izdanju emisije analiziramo šta turski sigurnosni stručnjaci kažu o vojnoj operaciji na sjeveru Sirije. Prije razgovora sa našim gostima, pogledajmo prilog o najnovijim dešavanjima na tursko-sirijskoj granici. O turskoj vojnoj operaciji na sjeveru Sirije razgovarao sam sa političkim analitičarem centra SETA u Ankari, Bilgehanom Öztürkom. Mr. Bilgehan Öztürk, hello and welcome to the Al Jazeera Balkans channel. Now, what are Turkey's major security concerns now on its southeastern border, and how will a buffer zone help secure the country's 910-kilometer long border with Syria?
There are two major concerns of Turkey when it comes to security. The first one is the border security of Turkey. And as we are sharing a 911 kilometers borderline with Syria, it is a long borderline, and this is itself a source of insecurity. Because the ones who take control of border security are aware of the fact that a long borderline itself is hard to protect. And when it comes to border security, of course there is the PYD's presence there, and neighboring, bordering a terrorist organization itself is a source of concern, because they exploit the borderline by digging tunnels beneath the borderline in order to cross the borderline underground, both sides, from Syria to Turkey and Turkey to Syria. They are mobilizing their militants through these tunnels. They are mobilizing and carrying their weapons, their explosives through these tunnels, and they are actually conducting fire attacks. Before the launch of the Operation Peace Spring, we registered around 11 attacks, cross-border attacks from PYD. they were either mortar attacks or firearms attacks on the borderline. In order to secure your border, you have to get rid of the terrorist elements on the other side of the border. You can't just secure your borderline by taking precautions on the borderline. You have to start, securing your border deeper inside of the border. I'm talking about the northern chunk of Syrian border. So that is why a operation with an aims to create a safe zone is a way to get rid of your concerns in terms of border security. Without going deep on the other side of the border, you can't just secure your Turkish-Syrian border, because when Assad regime, Syrian regime, was in charge of the country, I'm talking about before 2011, 2010, we used to deal with a state mechanism. So border security is something you share the responsibility with your counterpart on the other side of the border. When Syrian uprisings turned into a civil war, we experienced territorial control of multiple actors. After a certain point, Assad regime, gave away the northern parts of the country to PYD, and it became a quite fragmented territorial control on the other side of the border.
Now, we know that Turkey did build a wall along a significant stretch of its borderline with Syria, but that hasn't really made the country any safer, has it?
Actually, the border wall is almost in every part of the 911 kilometers border. It is partly a solution to the border security. But as I told you before, whatever physical obstacle you put on the borderline, it won't be completely enough to secure your border and to ensure your national security. Because on the other side of the border, if there is a terrorist organization, they know how to overcome these physical obstacles. They dig tunnel, they overcome the border wall or any other physical obstacle. They are trained to do this. And when we talk about, for example, Turkish-Syrian border has always been a problematic border. Even in the 90s, there were mines planted in both sides of the border, both Syrian and Turkish side of the border, but still smuggling activities were going on. So that means whatever physical obstacle you put on the borderline, there is always some way to overcome that and exploit that. Think about the US-Mexican border. We can argue that the security mechanisms is quite robust there, but the smuggling and also the drug organizations, they find some ways to overcome those physical measures in order to continue their activities. The same applies to Turkish-Syrian border, and to a greater extent.
Now, would Ankara rather have President Bashar al-Assad's forces along its Syrian border instead of Marxist Kurdish guerrillas?
Of course, when we have to choose between the two, we would go for Assad regimes taking control of certain areas. But of course, we wouldn't prefer this because if you remember, in 2013 in our border town, we had a bombing attacks in which 53 Turkish people and also Syrian refugees lost their lives, and this was proved to be an act of Syrian intelligence. So the operatives of Syrian intelligence. Since the beginning of the civil war, we are on the opposite side of the conflict with Syrian regime, and as this bombing attack in 2013 showed us that the Syrian regime moved in a revanchist manner in order to take revenge from Turkey because of its support to Syrian opposition. So there is no insurance that the Assad regime will not take the opportunity to take revenge from Turkey again by taking back the control of certain territories on Turkish border, and even the relinquishing of northern territories to PYD in 2012 was an act by Assad regime to take revenge from Turkey, because the best way to hurt Turkey was making its border with PYD. That was the rationale why Assad regime gave away those territories to PYD. So of course, as I said, if we have to choose between the two, we would go for Assad regime, but we don't rely on Assad regime in terms of its integrity towards Turkey's security concerns.
Now, do Turkey, Iraq, Syria, and Iran have a common understanding of the threat posed by Kurdish Marxist guerrillas in the region, and do they have a common policy of battling these groups?
I would say to some extent, yes. In the past, especially with Iran, we experienced a cooperation between Turkey and Iran against PKK threat. For example, they time to time conducted joint operations, aerial bombardments against PKK targets in northern Iraq, and also the border areas of Iran, because they had their own PKK, Pejak, and the PKK was in northern Iraq. But at the same time, we also experienced some periods in which Turkey and Iran could not cooperate on that issue. For Iraq, for example, they have their own priorities. Of course, Turkey is conducting anti-terror operations in northern Iraq against PKK by notifying and informing both KRG in northern Iraq and also the central government of Iraq, and also expects both KRG and central governments in Iraq to cooperate with Turkey in order to eradicate the PKK threat. But they have their own shortcomings. Let's say both KRG and central government of Iraq, they have much more bitter problems in terms of other security problems, in terms of administrative problems, and PKK, the struggle against PKK is not their number one priority, but it is for Turkey number one priority. And because of this difference of priorities between Turkey, Iraq, or Turkey and Iran, I wouldn't say 100% there's a coordination and cooperation between all these countries, Iraq, Iran, and Turkey, against Marxist-Leninist Kurdish, separatist movement.
Mr. Bilgehan Öztürk, it was a pleasure speaking to you. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
Brojne NATO članice su suspendovale prodaju oružja Turskoj nakon pokretanja operacije u Siriji. Zanimljivo je da isto nisu učinile Saudijskoj Arabiji kada je počela bombardovanje Jemena prije 4 godine. Više detalja o najvažnijim izvoznicima vojne opreme Turskoj u nastavku. Göktuğ Sönmez, sigurnosni analitičar centra Orsam, pojašnjava nam zbog čega Ankara nije naišla na razumijevanje svojih zapadnih saveznika. Mr. Göktuğ Sönmez, hello and welcome to the Al Jazeera Balkans channel. Now, a number of Western countries have very harshly criticized Turkey's military incursion into northern Syria. Many of them are NATO member states. Why do you think there is so little understanding for Turkey's border security concerns?
I think first there is this propaganda power of PKK or YPG, or how they call it, Syrian Democratic Forces. We see all of them as the same organization, the PKK actually, and the leadership cult is the same. Most of the staff and human resources are the same as well. There is this propaganda image of this group that an anti-ISIS, quite secular and woman-friendly force, but it's only a propaganda because we know that they carried out a lot of humanitarian crimes and war crimes in their own regions. We are talking about a population of 16% actually, but 10-16% let's say, and they are controlling 24% of the Syrian territory. So the problem is, first, the United States strategy of supporting such a group was a quite false strategy, because you are supporting a terrorist group with much less military power or anything like that. You cannot justify this kind of strategy actually against your NATO ally, and you know quite well that this group is fighting Turkey for 40 years and costed 30,000 lives and billions of dollars. I can see the idea behind this, but you know that there's a force on the ground and saying whatever you are saying to them, and they are fighting ISIS on behalf of you. So you don't get your citizens back, you don't get your hands dirty actually, you don't spend a lot of money on your own soldiers, so you don't get any public reaction because of this. You can just send them ammunitions, military equipment and financial resources, and they do the fighting for you.
So they're
but
using a very outsourced system.
Sure, but the problem is, in terms of this fight, we know that all of the operations, including Raqqa, couldn't have happened actually without the US military support, the air support, Air Force actually. Because we are talking about a group with quite limited fighting capability actually, and we saw that here right now. After Turkish operation, they just decided to make an agreement with the regime and Russia, because they know that they cannot fight Turkey without the US support actually. So on the one hand, it's propaganda. On the other hand, outsourcing is quite beneficial for many countries. And on the other hand, as a third factor, this group allows many countries to say that we cannot get our people back from there, like ISIS returnees I'm talking about. We cannot get them from there because it's not a legitimate authority, it's not recognized by the United Nations, so we can get several of them, but not all of them. So just trying to keep them in Syria and Iraq. So the returnees problem is not a big problem in Europe and in the United States because they can keep them there, I guess. Yeah.
Now, is Turkey disappointed with the United States as an ally? And what is it that Russia can offer Turkey that the United States has failed to deliver?
I think what Russia offers is, first, a back channel with the Syrian regime. Because in at least some specific areas, you need to have a kind of not direct channel maybe, but need a back channel with the regime. And also, Russia is kind of being a catalyst between Turkey and Iran as well. And Turkey is quite convinced that the US strategy in Syria and Turkish strategy in Syria is quite far from being agreeable for both sides. But in terms of the Russian position, yeah, we know that they're also carrying out quite a big humanitarian crimes, war crimes and all that stuff. But from Turkish point of view, their position to strengthen the regime and help the regime to regain its territories, at the end, might at least eliminate the YPG bases in Syria as well. But still there's a confidence issue between these parties, the trust issue. So I think Turkey's best option is working with all the parties, Russia, Iran, and maybe the regime at some point, and also the United States, but especially for its own benefit. It needs to take its own military action, which is the case with this Spring Peace operation. So yeah, Russia offers some kind of a back channel, a diplomatic channel, and also you have to, actually, it's not only about what Russia is offering actually. Russia is on the ground now. The US is like decreasing in terms of its power. So Russia is one of the major kingmakers in the game, not only in Syria, but also in the Middle East in general. They're trying to sell like S-400 to Saudi Arabia and United Emirates, and so they are trying to have a much deeper control in terms of the Middle East. So you cannot actually devise a serious strategy without Russia and also Iran. So I think first the problem was the United States supporting YPG quite directly, and this was quite a big problem between Turkey and the United States. So this helped Turkey to move closer to Russia. So it was the United States' mistake at the first instance. And then the Russian position about Turkey's Afrin operation was quite important, the Olive Branch operation. Russia, first the Euphrates Shield and then Afrin operation, both of them Russia allowed Turkey to use Syrian airspace, and it made a huge impact actually. So it kind of like helped to rebuild trust between Turkey and Russia after the jet crisis in 2015, I guess, yeah.
Now, would Ankara rather have President Bashar al-Assad's forces along its Syrian border instead of Marxist Kurdish guerrillas?
I don't think neither the political area nor the public is quite ready to talk with the Assad regime now. And Turkey's position is quite clear about the Assad regime. He should be out first. And even if it's not possible, at some point, he should be quite willing to carry out many reforms, actually. Turkey has quite good relations with the opposition, and especially the Free Syrian Army and now the National Army. So their demands should be taken into account. And also, with the regime, Turkey has a kind of like disagreement as well about the YPG issue, because as far as we can see, there is an agreement between YPG and the Assad regime right now, and it might end up with an autonomous region. So with the Syrian regime, Turkey is not ready to talk about this relationship at this point actually. So first, we need to see Assad's willingness for reforms. But ideally, Turkey's option is trying to have Assad out of the equilibrium actually. Yeah. So mostly Turkey will probably try to establish this diplomacy with Russia and Iran rather than the regime. But having a diplomatic relations with Russia about the Syrian strategy also means that you have a back channel with the Syrian regime. So we are not talking about directly establishing a connection with the regime, but by using Russia and Iran, maybe some like back channels can be used. But with Assad in power, it's not an option.
What is to be done with the 3.6 million officially registered Syrian refugees in Turkey? Some high-ranking Turkish politicians have been calling for them to be sent back into parts of Syria, into northern Syria.
It's actually not a deportation. It should be a voluntary journey actually for them. It's their it's their own territory. So if they are willing to go there, they need to have a safe and secure area. That's why Turkey is quite insistent on this safe zone issue. Because otherwise, we know that like a lot of people also trying to cross the Mediterranean, cross the Aegean Sea, and go to Europe, and Europe is quite concerned about this. That's the reason why they are kind of like trying Turkey to stop these people. And so ideally, the picture is, first, you cannot send all people to Syria. But we are talking about like 1 million people, maybe like 2 millions. 2 million can be a bit more like ambitious goal actually, but if Turkey can establish this safe zone, we are talking about like 30 kilometers in depth, and in terms of the length of this secure area, it's like 480 kilometers. We can improve the living conditions there, because we can see the Euphrates Shield operation and their results, and people are going back there already. So the only option here is like voluntary return of these people to their own cities and own areas, villages. So Turkey is not trying to kind of like a demographic engineering. Turkey is not trying to do this, but they should be willingly go to their own areas.
Mr. Göktuğ Sönmez, it was a pleasure speaking to you. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you very much for your time, and inviting me. Thank you.
Iako je Turska podijeljena po ideološkim linijama, zanimljivo je da i pristalice i protivnici stranke pravde i razvoja u velikoj mjeri podržavaju vojnu operaciju protiv kurdskih marksističkih militanata na sjeveru Sirije. To se može zaključiti iz razgovora sa analitičarima iz provladinih, ali i samostalnih istraživačkih centara, kao i u diskursu koji se vodi u turskim medijima, na društvenim mrežama i u izjavama političke opozicije te zemlje. Poštovani gledalci, bilo je to sve u ovom izdanju Granica Istoka. Ako ste propustili bilo koji dio, emisiju možete pogledati na našem portalu balkans.aljazeera.net. Hvala na pažnji.